prime thing is you have to win.
Ill intent, violence, physicality, pain. Enough is enough.
All right, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. We are coming at you guys live again. Even though the Raiders are out of the playoffs, they are still in the news, and Raider fans are very anxious to see who is going to be the new GM and head coach of the Raiders. That's Vic Tafur, Tashan Reed. I'm Ted Nguyen, and we're going to bring you the latest in the Raiders head coach and general manager search. How you guys doing today?
Good, man. It's another search, keeping our off seasons busy. No relaxing time for Vic and I, grinding away on the phones all day, man, slaving to bring the people to content. So it's going good right now.
Man, it's a rough life for us. But I will say it's definitely been a kind of a hurry up and wait process the last couple of days. They're all kind of in a little bit of a holding pattern. I know they have one more interview today with Robert Saleh, but they're still kind of waiting on the Lions to lose to kind of get that process going again. But we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, during the show.
Yeah. So if you're a Raider fan, are you rooting against the Lions this week to get the process started?
I mean, I would assume so. I mean, it's already started since he interviewed virtually, but he can't do in-person. Really, any coach that's in the playoffs can't do in-person interviews at this point until their season is over. So if you think it matters that Ben Johnson interviews in person 2 weeks earlier, then sure. I guess you're rooting against the Lions this weekend.
Well, maybe if you view the Cowboys as a potential competitor for Ben Johnson, you want them to, because they can't interview any of these candidates until they're out of the playoffs, right? So maybe if you view the Cowboys as a competitor, you want them to keep moving on, and maybe Jerry Jones gets impatient and pulls the trigger on Deion Sanders.
Yeah, I don't know if I really see the Cowboys as a viable option, because I don't know if Jerry Jones is going to hire a first-time head coach who has no relationship with, no history with. It doesn't seem like quite his MO, but you never know. But I think he kind of got late to the process, so obviously those two names are ones you want to throw in a hat, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, but I'm guessing he goes a different direction.
All right, well, let's talk about Ben Johnson. There's some conflicting reports, but it seems like most of the media and insiders, quote unquote insiders, are seeing Ben Johnson as the favorite for the Raiders job. How did we get here?
I mean, the fact that he's like the favorite for the Raiders isn't really like a surprising part. With Mike Vrabel off the board, like I think he's pretty clearly like the top head coaching candidates. He's probably the favorite for a few teams if they put their list out there. But I think the more interesting part is the fact that he's actually appears to be interested in the job. There's some questions about whether he would take the interview, and as we reported, Tom Brady played a pretty instrumental role in getting him to ultimately take that virtual interview with the Raiders, last week. And so I think it's more so the fact that it's a possibility is what's surprising, not so much that the Raiders, he's their top choice. Because I mean, it makes all the sense in the world why he would be. The Lions offense, since he's taken over, has been arguably the best in the league. Has been the most productive in terms of points and yards per game, and they're a legit contender. And while he's not the head coach, he's been a huge part of that. And guys also have spoken pretty favorably about his leadership skills as well, and how he's developed in that area of the game, and not just being sort of that mad scientist in a cold dark room drawing up plays or something like that. So the Raiders' interest is easy to understand, but I think the more interesting part has been Johnson actually giving him the time of day.
We'll jump in and say we have some breaking news. I guess Ron Rivera is going to interview for the Raiders head coaching job today. That just went down now. So I think that brings the numbers up to 8. Former Cal guy and a former head coach, so some more experience there, but we'll talk about that. But more about Ben Johnson. I think we talked about just the Tom Brady effect. It seems like if Tom Brady's not involved, and it's the old way of doing things with Mark Davis and his buddies, his alumni, and all that stuff, I don't think Ben Johnson considers this job, especially without a quarterback in place. I think there's and really no direct path to get one next year in the draft. So I think that's a huge void for them as opposed to some other teams in this process. So I think you look at Tom Brady, and apparently he talked to him before the broadcast think it was week 9, and they kind of set the groundwork, and he's talked to him since then. So I think this shows the impact of having Tom Brady involved in this process.
Yeah, and before we get into the Tom Brady aspect of it, and some people are seeing this as an unfair advantage for the Raiders, but it's something that the owners have agreed on, and I mean it's already in place. But I mean, for Ben Johnson and the quarterback deal, I think that's one of the biggest reservations that people have with matching Ben Johnson with his Raiders job. But I mean, he resurrected Jared Goff's career and got him and on the right path. And obviously, to me, it seems like he's not looking for your typical high traits, scramble around quarterback. He's looking for somebody that could execute his offense, throw the ball with timing, play action over to the middle of the field. Not that he doesn't want a highly regarded quarterback, but I think if you're Ben Johnson, I think he would be okay with a bridge quarterback or somebody that is considered a bridge quarterback. You know, I honestly think he would be okay with Aiden O'Connell for a year if he has to. And it wouldn't surprise me if Derek Carr was maybe in the running to be his quarterback. I think he actually fits pretty well in the system. He had some success playing for Kubiak in a similar system last year, especially when the team was healthy. It's a possibility.
That was well done, man. You got O'Connell in there, you got Derek Carr in there. That was pretty good. That was well done. I don't know about all that. I think you look at his choices this year. If you looked at people talking about the Bears, the Raiders, and Jaguars, I think it seems like he has. I mean, you don't know if it's true or not, but the word around the league is that he might prefer Trevor Lawrence over Caleb Williams, which knocks the Bears probably down a peg. But again, it's going to come down to that. Does he think Trevor Lawrence is a guy who can get him a ring at some point? Then maybe that's the job he wants. If not, like you said, he can definitely have the time to get a stopgap guy in. If it's Aiden or somebody else or a veteran guy can come in, or you can trade for Hendon Hooker. There's a lot of different options you can do in the meantime. Because clearly, I would think if you hire Ben Johnson, first-time guy, a mandate to kind of build your way, pair him with a GM he wants, whatever. So clearly, there's a timeline, a longer one than usual for the Raiders. Usually, it's kind of win now, or we're going to fire you in a year and a half. But which is kind of ridiculous. But I think he'll definitely come in here with at least a 2 or 3 year lease to kind of get things going in the right direction and find a quarterback at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think just because Goff is a guy that doesn't have high-end mobility and athletic traits doesn't mean like Ben wouldn't want that at some point. I think it's just a good sign that he can have a productive offense with a quarterback who doesn't necessarily have top-tier traits and who was playing pretty poorly his last couple of years with the Rams after they made that Super Bowl run. But I think with Johnson, his interest in the Raiders is pretty big picture, whether it's them having, really being the only team that he's interviewed that has a true GM vacancy. And so he can start on the same page as the GM. That was a big reason why they moved on from Tom Telesco, was to create that opportunity. The roster is pretty wide open, not just at quarterback, but really the entire team. They have over $100 million in cap space. They have a good amount of draft capital, the number 6 pick in 2025. And so, even if you don't get your quarterback answer long-term this year, there's a lot of resources there that you can use to build up the rest of the roster, which the Lions and Jared Goff, as much as his turnaround is about, Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell and the work the coaching staff has done, it's also because they've really strengthened that roster on both sides of the ball. I mean, the offensive line is one of the best in the league. They have Amon Brown. They have, a couple good running backs, really good tight end. Really the only weakness, I guess you could say, their offense has, they don't have like a true, truly deep wide receiver room. But even that's kind of changed with Jamison Williams coming into his own this year. And so, I think there's other ways to build up a team and have success outside of just getting a superstar quarterback your first year on the job. And really, if you look at his other, opportunities on the table, I mean, the Jaguars have a quarterback, but I don't know how people feel about Trevor Lawrence coming off of his struggles the last couple of seasons. And he also has a really big financial commitment that makes it harder to build up the rest of that Jaguars roster, which needs a ton of work. Obviously, they're one of the worst teams in the league. And then the Bears, I thought Caleb Williams had a fine rookie season, but who's to say that, he's Ben Johnson's speed, or he believes that he's going to be, a number 1 overall pick type of guy moving forward. So the Raiders definitely have a worse quarterback situation than both of those teams. But again, things can change pretty quickly, and you don't necessarily have to find the answer this year. And when it comes to his security, I mean, Raiders have fired 3 head coaches since 2022. The cash situation is a lot better, but they're not trying to keep firing these coaches. And to get Ben Johnson, you're going to have to open up that pocketbook. And I don't think there's going to be a contract that you could pull the plug on quickly. So I think really, regardless of, whether they're upset or not, I think he's going to have a good amount of runway if he does come here.
Yeah, I mean, stability and job security matters less when you're getting, if you get like a 5-year, $20 million per year contract or something like that, because you're still going to get paid regardless if you get fired or not. I mean, Josh McDaniels is still enjoying the fruits of his contract. And but I think if Ben Johnson is the coach, I think he's going to prioritize getting not just a good offensive line and elite offensive line. I wouldn't be surprised if Will Campbell's the pick 6 overall if Ben Johnson ends up being a coach. I mean, they picked Penei Sewell over some highly regarded receivers when with the Lions, and obviously that worked out extremely well for them. But real quick, I wanted to, and we'll talk more about those things if Ben Johnson actually becomes the coach. But right now it's just I don't know what to call it. I guess it's just noise until it actually happens. But let's talk a little bit about Tom Brady and his advantage as somebody who commentates in these games and who's able to talk to these coaches. I think some people around the league don't think it's a fair advantage. I mean, I know you guys wrote a little bit about it. You guys want to talk some more about that?
Yeah, we read a story last night saying that apparently he's going to honor his contract at Fox and do it for another 9 years, which is it's a long time. So if that's the case, I don't think you really can take an active, front of the room kind of role with the Raiders. It'll be more of in the shadows like he has been. I think that's why Mark Davis will have to probably say, hey, you know what? He was an advisor in these moves, but this was all my decisions, which is kind of a weird thing because everyone knows Tom Brady's kind of been running the show behind the scenes. So I think it definitely is a question for people around the league to look at. And as of right now, it seems like the league doesn't really care. It seems like the league is kind of cool with whatever. But if you're the Bears at this process and you lose, or the Jaguars, you lose Ben Johnson to the Raiders, I would think you'll have to, something to yell about for sure, because I don't think it's quite fair. And Raider fans don't care. And, I mean, the league doesn't care at this point, so we'll see what happens. But the idea that he can call a game this weekend and have access to both, Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, and the maybe a GM guy in Newmark with the Commanders, and it's not really, I think, fair.
Is he allowed to talk to those guys? Is part of his contract? Does his agreement restrict talking to those guys, or is he able to freely talk to them?
On the sidelines, before the game, he can. You can't talk to him as far as in a job capacity, like in terms of information and getting background on the matchups and stuff. But just chatting on the field, there's no rule against that. Which is, I think, from what we hear, how he and Ben Johnson had a long talk back in Week 9. It was kind of a similar situation where he was on the field, and I'm sure he laid the kind of groundwork. Hey, this is a possibility. This could happen. Would you be interested? Yada yada yada. So it clearly is. It has an effect on things, but at this point, no one seems to care, so there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, I definitely think it's a weird situation, but I don't know how much of an advantage it is for the Raiders necessarily. Is a 5-minute conversation, if it's that long, pregame on the sidelines with Ben Johnson, going to be what gets him to come here? I don't think that's necessarily what's going to be the final nail in the coffin for him. If it is, sure, I guess, but I just don't really see him being swayed that easily, and then with Tom Brady's day-to-day role, just so people know, he can't have a formal role beyond minority owner, even if he wasn't a Fox analyst, because of NFL rules. You have to be related to the team owner in order to have a position on the team. That's why you see the Chargers, for example, Spanos's kid is the president of football operations. Brady couldn't actually have that role no matter what his other job was, and so it doesn't really make sense for him to stop doing the Fox job unless he's going to become the controlling owner, which probably isn't going to happen for quite some time, if it is going to happen at all. So, 9 years, why not keep making $50 million or whatever he's making, working 5 months out the year. So, it doesn't really change his role either way, because he technically can't really have a role either way. So it's always going to be more of that high level advisor role unless he becomes the actual owner, which he currently isn't yet, but he's obviously, his influence is all over this search. So I don't really think it's definitely weird that he's going to be calling the game. Cause it's let's say Ben Johnson makes like the dumbest play call we've ever seen in our life. Like, is Tom Brady really going to shit on him for it? Like, probably not. But again, I don't think Ben Johnson is taking the job or not based off of, Tom Brady kissing his ass in the broadcast booth.
I do think it's funny because we have a couple of media writers I think have written this week or said that, hey, at some point he has to address this in the game, on Saturday. He has to address the Raiders thing and talk about it. Like, why would you address it? If I'm Tom Brady, I'm not addressing shit. I'm like, hey, man, I'm here to call a game. Whatever happens. I'm not going to talk about it. So I don't know why there's a need for him to address it if he plans to keep doing this and kind of act like it's not a big deal. So if it's not, don't make it a big deal, and if that's what he wants to do. So I'm fascinated to see what he does on Saturday, but I don't think he'll say much about this. I would think he'll play it low key and kind of go with the flow.
Yeah, don't self snitch. Like don't self snitch on yourself.
And when it comes to like Brady's involvement, like the Raiders are interviewing today, I believe they have both Robert Saleh and Ron Rivera scheduled for in-person interviews today. Brady usually doesn't travel to the games that he calls until Saturday. He flies private, I guess, and then he leaves out Sunday after the game. So if they do have things on Friday or Monday and he did want to be involved, like he could technically still do that. So just a note added for his involvement in the interview process while he's also being a commentator.
Yeah, and it's not like the Patriots, when he played for the Patriots, they bend the rules a little bit. They don't mind. Yeah. I mean,
I just just because a guy isn't calling a game, like what's stopping any minority owner from texting, like, I don't know, the hot shot candidate and be like, hey, you want to come work over here? Like, like they can still do that.
Yeah, I mean, Al Davis famously said, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. So, these are all fits with the philosophy. It's all fits with the Raiders and Patriots philosophy. It's all good. And like, let's not act like tampering doesn't happen all the time in the league. I mean, tampering is happening 24/7. It's not, the first day of free agency or the legal tampering time, these deals just come out of nowhere. Like, tampering is happening all the time. So, to me, it's not that big of a deal. I think some people are making maybe they're getting pushed by some people within teams that feel like it's unfair, but it's not that big of a deal to me. All right, so let's talk about some other candidates. Ben Johnson is not the only guy that's going to interview with the Raiders, and I don't know what the chances are, but it seems like a lot of Raider fans are putting a lot of their hope and putting a lot of their eggs in this basket. But there are other candidates, and people shouldn't be surprised if Ben Johnson doesn't take the job. For example, Aaron Glenn, his coaching mate with the Lions, is another candidate. Pete Carroll, Robert Saleh, Todd Monken, Steve Spagnuolo, Vance Joseph. Am I missing anybody else?
You got 8.
Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Steve Spagnuolo, Pete Carroll, Vance Joseph, Robert Saleh, Ron Rivera, and Todd Monken. Those are the 8.
Yeah, the two that stand out to me, I think if you had to list them maybe in order of odds of happening or who's next in line, I would think Aaron Glenn and Pete Carroll probably the next two on my list. I think Aaron Glenn obviously looks like he's ready for a job and he's saying all the right things. Great resume, hot team. I think he's got a bunch of interviews already set, and I think he'll get a job somewhere. Either if it's the Jets or New Orleans. I think those are 2 ones being mentioned the most. But I think the Raiders are still in the mix. I think obviously he's a interesting candidate. And I think Pete Carroll gives you, we talked about this before, the experience, kind of like the face. If Tom Brady is to be behind the scenes, Mark Davis does not want to be at a microphone. So Pete Carroll will kind of give you the voice for this thing going forward to get the bridge between this phase and the next phase. And kind of he has experience. Obviously he's won, so I think he wants to get back in. So I think Pete Carroll makes sense from that sense.
Yeah, and does Aaron Glenn have head coaching experience?
No,
he doesn't. No. Yeah, so it seems like, but most of these candidates, almost every candidate except for Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson, have head coach experience. So I think that definitely matters in this coaching cycle for the Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that, coming off of hiring, the inexperienced coach in Antonio Pierce, that they would veer towards, somebody that does have head coaching experience. And Monken wasn't an NFL head coach, but he was a college head coach. So it's, not exactly the same, but he has some of the similar skill sets. So like you said, Johnson and Glenn, they're the only two guys that don't have head coach experience. And I would imagine, like, if they can't get Johnson, like, it would feel more likely that they would go for somebody that's been a head coach before. Glenn, I think he's a solid option as well, but it seems like more likely that he'd be headed towards maybe the Saints opening. I know he was an assistant there in the past, and has some more familiarity with them and has been getting a stronger push. But the sense from people that I've talked to, if it's not Johnson, then Carroll probably has the best shot. We talked about it last week with Jed Hughes being, the executive that they hired from a search firm to help with the candidates. Another, I think we mentioned in the show that he helped place Andy Reid and, the former Buccaneers head coach that won the Super Bowl, but he also helped place Pete Carroll with the Seahawks back in the day as well. So they've had a relationship for about 15 years now. And, Carroll came in earlier this week. I know he has some other opportunities, but I think he'd be a solid backup plan. Like, he is old as hell. Like, he'd be 74 at the start of next season. But, same thing would be the case with somebody like Bill Belichick. And he's been, getting talked up in cycles as well. So I think Carroll would be a solid hire. And, maybe you could bring in sort of maybe a Robert Saleh or somebody like that as a defensive coordinator to maybe be that head coach in waiting, just given his age.
Yeah. If that happens, I would, I think bringing an offensive mind or something like Josh McCown and say, maybe he's the guy in waiting would be ideal. But Carroll interviewed on Monday, Vance Joseph on Thursday, Saleh interviewed on Friday. Let's talk about the general manager search. Right now, the Bucks exec John Spytek seems like a hot name. Packer executive John Eric Sullivan, Steelers exec Sheldon White, Giants executive Brandon Brown, and Chargers executive Chad Alexander, who's analytically minded guy. Any updates other than those guys for the GM spot?
No, those are the known candidates right now. I think Spytek is the one that grabs people's attention the most, given his connections to Brady. He was a Bucks executive back when Brady played for the Bucks, and he was instrumental in helping bring him to the team. And he also was college teammates with Brady at Michigan back in the day for one season in 1999. So they go way back. There's a lot of familiarity there. And just outside of Brady, he's also, I think, a pretty legitimate GM candidate. The Raiders brought him in back in 2022 before they hired Ziegler for a GM interview. So they have some familiarity with him. And he's been a candidate for years now. I think he interviewed for some other jobs in this cycle as well. And so I think he'd be a pretty strong hire. The other name that jumps out, Sullivan, he's been with the Packers pretty much forever. They've had a lot of success, won the Super Bowl during his time there. And I think Alexander is sort of an interesting one. He was with the Jets before the Chargers, but originally he's a Ravens guy. So he came up under Ozzie Newsome, and it kind of, has gone through that GM pipeline. And typically those guys have gone on to be pretty good as GMs in the league. So maybe he's sort of a dark horse sleeper name there to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's some definitely buzz league-wide with Alexander. I think he's a guy everyone looks at as a future GM. I think the one guy we wrote about last week was Lance Newmark with the Commanders. He has a long history with both Glenn and John Snooze with the Lions for 25 years, I want to say 26 years. So and he left recently. So he's a guy who has experience and knows those guys pretty well, and would be a nice pair with either one of those guys if they get a job either with the Raiders or somewhere else. So that's a name I think will be announced at some point pretty soon. And I think once we get past this weekend, we'll have some more names probably on that list, and hopefully, but I think we're looking at both these lists probably being in the 8 to 10 range. I know some teams are going crazy, like the Jets have interviewed 20 freaking people, and the Bears are close to 20, which for the head coaching job, which I think is ridiculous. But I don't know how 20 people. I don't know how you remember everybody. I mean, you're gonna forget a couple, and that's to me that's a lot of hot air. But who knows? I mean, everyone has their own process, but I think 8 or 10 was the goal. And we'll probably get there with both lists at some point pretty soon.
Yeah, and with the GM candidates, like they haven't actually interviewed any of them to this point, I don't believe. So it's been all head coach interviews at this point. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to hire the head coach first. Given that they aren't going to hire one until they can have in-person interviews with everybody, most likely they could very well, hire a GM first and then hire the head coach from there. But we're interested to see how it all plays out. I think the GM pick will be telling about which way the the head coach hire is going to go. Because if it's a guy that has ties to a specific head coach candidate, that'll jump out. Like Vic said, if it's, let's say they hire Lance Newman as the GM, then that'll kind of signal pretty strongly towards Ben Johnson. But if it's somebody like Spytek who doesn't really have dominant connections to any candidate, then that'll leave it pretty wide open. So be interesting to see how that plays out. And I guess we should, it's worth mentioning also, like for the hiring panel, like to this point, the people that have been involved in the interviews have been Mark Davis, Tom Brady, and then the three new other minority owners, or three of the four, I should say, and Tom Wagner, Michael Meltman, and Egon Durbin. Those three are, the guys have mostly business backgrounds, but Durbin was, one of the guys that helped run WME, which is a pretty prominent agency that represents both players and coaches. And the Raiders have interviewed a few guys that have some WME ties. So he does have some knowledge as well when it comes to candidates.
Okay, from what we've heard, those three guys you mentioned are going to ensure that the finances won't be a problem. I think if you're not going to lose Ben Johnson because you got more money somewhere else, and they're going to make sure the offer is the best offer if that's what it takes. So I think that's a good thing for Raider fans to hear. And as far as getting these head coaching things done, interviews, well, today's 2 will make 7 total. The one guy who is not interviewed yet is Todd Monken. They play Sunday, so I think the rules are he could come in, I believe, 3 days after that if they lose. So I think that could happen next week if it's still going to happen. He's the one guy who's not interviewed yet for of the 8 candidates.
Yeah, and also if Ben Johnson if they're going all in on Ben Johnson, they're likely not going to hire a GM until Ben Johnson gets hired. And does that pose a little bit of a risk as far as, you might lose out on some of these guys that you're interested in because you were hoping that Ben Johnson would take the job and maybe if he gets strung out because the Lions make it to the Super Bowl, that's a risk you're taking, right?
I mean, I don't think they're necessarily going to wait on Johnson before they hire the GM. Like, it's not a guarantee that you're going to pair somebody that he would be his pick necessarily. And, like we said, none of the other openings that he's interviewed for have GM vacancies. So, if that was something that was going to keep him from entertaining jobs, I don't know why he would interview for those places. So I don't think it's necessarily a situation where they wait around just because Johnson, if they can't interview him until after or the week before the Super Bowl, I don't think that means they're going to necessarily wait on a GM. Like Spytek, for example, like I said, I think he's a quality GM pick. And if, Tom Brady is as influential, as we believe he is, I'm sure he could try to sell to Ben Johnson why he's a good GM.
All right.
Move my mic closer. Is that better? People say I'm not loud enough. Is that better? It was.
All right. We're going to get into some fan questions. Trip donated and asked, please tell me Ben Johnson is coming to the Raiders. He gave you $5 to say that. So, and also what kind of communication is going on between the two camps now? Can they talk to his agent?
Well, I'm not going to guarantee that he's coming to the Raiders. I don't want to break your heart, but in terms of communication, like, they can talk to his agent as much as they want to. There's no real rules around that, but they can't communicate. Technically, they can't communicate directly with Ben Johnson until they have another interview, which it depends on the Lions' playoff outcomes. If they lose this weekend to the Commanders, then they can interview Johnson in person next week. But if the Lions advance, then they won't be able to interview him again until the week before the Super Bowl. Tom Brady, though, since he's calling the game this weekend, he can go talk to Ben Johnson on the sideline, and if Ben Johnson wants to talk to him. So they could talk again on Saturday if they want to.
I will say, I mean, this answers the question maybe not quite as well as you want, but I think it's Ben Johnson's job if he wants it. I think he's the Raiders' first choice. I think that's the impression that I get. So, I mean, it comes down to, does he want this job or is he like Trevor Lawrence? And I don't get the sense the Bears are really in it anymore, but maybe they are. And then obviously a huge consideration for him is you can stay put. You can stay with the Lions if they, and build whatever they're building. And maybe he enjoys being the guy calling the plays for another year. And there'll probably be some better jobs available next year. Because let's face it, these jobs are not the best openings in the world. There might be one next year with, say, like you mentioned, Joe Burrow. But I do think that job may be open at some point in the next year or two. So who knows? I mean, no one really knows what Ben Johnson's thinking. I'm sure he's not telling anybody. And but that'll be the big question coming up.
Yeah, and I will say, and this is not any reported. This is not with any reported inside information. But as somebody that followed the Raiders for a long time, don't get your hopes up. Don't put all your eggs in this basket and just hope it's gonna happen and get your heart broken. You know, it just seems like from the outside and looking at Twitter, these Raider fans are ready for Ben Johnson. Like they think it's gonna 100% happen. All I'm saying is, for somebody that follows this team for a long time, just be ready for the worst. So just guard your
See,
heart.
I disagree, man. If you're a Raiders fan, this offseason stuff is a time when you get excited. You actually have this is a chance you can believe in things can possibly turn out, and you gotta hope for the best. And this is going to happen. I mean, because once the season starts, it pretty much goes downhill pretty quickly. So now's the time to get excited. Now's the time to believe in all things possible. We can get this guy the hot shot play caller. So I say put all your eggs in the basket. If they break, get some more eggs.
Yeah. Also, like, can't blame the fans when they're getting like teased all the time by all these random, reports that there's, momentum and all these other. It's looked like it's about to happen, but it's like they haven't even had an in-person interview yet. We can relax, guys. They technically cannot even hire him yet. So, we've got to blame the reporters a little bit as well for getting the fan base all riled up.
I am surprised that how many people are making this connection, though. I'll say that. All right. Real Talk Raider Nation asks, if Pete Carroll got the job, people say he would prep his successor early on, which makes sense. Who do you think he would prep? I mean, the dude is 72 years old, so yeah, it does make sense to have somebody ready in the wings. That's always such an awkward situation, though. I mean, we'll have Bill Belichick and Gerard Mayo. I mean, I think my guy would be Luke McCown. He's a guy that's gotten hyped for a while, hasn't had a chance to call plays yet. Worked with Kevin O'Connell and the Vikings, who I thought did one of the better coaching jobs this season.
You mean Josh or Luke? Which one?
Josh, sorry.
Josh McCown. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's going to be like a formal written in the contract type of situation like Gerard Mayo was. And also the tricky part is, like, let's say I don't know if Pete Carroll even has any ties to McCown, but if he did get him to come here and the Raiders offense was amazing next year, like, he might just get hired elsewhere. Like, that's the other part of this. So it sounds good in theory, but like, I don't really know how often that kind of thing plays out where a guy just kind of sticks around and passes on other jobs just so he can eventually one day succeed the old man. So we'll see. Like, maybe there's a guy like that on the coaching staff, but those guys typically get poached. So wouldn't bank on it.
I'd say there's no need for Pete to answer that question right away. I think he's coming in saying he's played the guy at least 2, 3, 4 years. He's looking, so I think he can always address that question down the road. I don't think it's come in day one. Like, this is my job. I'm the guy. But when I'm gone, that's the guy. So I think I can wait a little while. I think.
All right. Last question we'll take. True Raider asks, seriously, if Detroit wins it all, they will extend Ben Johnson and the Raiders will be asked out. Yep or nope?
Asked out.
I like that term.
I mean, again, we talked about the other options. I think look at Glenn and Pete Carroll. I mean, and I don't think even if you love Ben Johnson, the idea of him being this great play caller, young gun, that's not a slam dunk. I mean, obviously he has no experience as a head coach. I mean, there's probably question marks about his ability to lead a locker room. There's always gonna be questions. So I don't know if he's a guaranteed winner and he should be bummed you didn't get him. So I think that's why you go through this process and you have 2 or 3 options you can look at as option 1, 2 and 3. And so I don't know if your ass is totally out. I think you do your due diligence. You hope for the best. And again, I mean, it all depends on what Ben Johnson wants to do, and that's something that really out of the Raiders' control.
Yeah, and it's not like he needs to win a Super Bowl for them to want to extend him. He's obviously one of the best offensive coordinators in the league, and they would love to keep him at with any means possible. But he doesn't need to win a Super Bowl for that to happen. But it just seems like now's the right time. He passed on 2 coaching cycles already. It just seems like this is the right time. But again, him coming back to Detroit is a very real possibility.
Yeah, and I think, like, it would suck if the Raiders wait around all the time and he ends up just coming back. But That's something that's part of the reason why they're interviewing a pretty deep amount of head coach candidates to have a backup plan just in case, he does end up staying with the Lions or takes another job. Obviously, some of the candidates that they've talked to could get, hired elsewhere, but there's more candidates that they've talked to than there are openings. So at least some of these people will still be available. So I still think if you end up with I don't know, let's say Pete Carroll, I think the only other job he's interviewed for is the Bears job at this point. And it's kind of hard to say what the fuck the Bears are doing since they're interviewing everybody and their mamas. So we'll see. But, I think if you can fall back on somebody like Pete Carroll as an option, I wouldn't say your ass out necessarily. So I think they'll probably be fine either way.
Okay. All right. We got one more question our producer put into the reel. Space Beast asks, how have any of you talked with Tom Brady since he's come to the dark side?
No, he's walled himself off pretty good. He's not really the most accessible guy, and I think you can see the reasons why, because he is trying to do both of these things. He wants to. The thing last night about him honoring his deal with Fox came through his agent, so that's a way to get him to get out there. So I think he doesn't have any reason to speak on the record, and I'm curious, when they hire someone, if he will then, he may not. So I think that's kind of the weird thing about this, and why we talked about the need for a face to this whole thing at some point, because someone has to talk to him. Someone has to give the vision and talk about what's going to happen going down the road. So it may not be him, but I have not talked to him. I don't think Tashan has either.
Nah, I mean, he's calling a Super Bowl, so he's going to have some sort of like formal media availability at some point, and this stuff is going to come up. We'll see if the Raiders have a hire by then or not. But, anytime they have an introduction presser, like Mark Davis is there, so he'll talk at some point. He just hasn't talked yet.
Okay. All right. One last question from Eric Twin Green. What y'all got to say about that guy from ESPN saying that the Raiders didn't call about Jaden Daniels?
I put out there last night on Twitter. It's not true. I mean, they definitely did. I know Schefter's got his own sources. We all have different sources. I'm not going to call anybody a liar, but in this case, they definitely did. I mean, I think Deshaun and I both have pretty good sources in the building, and they definitely called about Jaden Daniels. They were told it's not going to happen, and we can see why. I mean, you turn the TV on last weekend, you can see why he wouldn't trade Jaden Daniels or the rights of Jaden Daniels. I mean, he's a once in a lifetime player. So they made the call, and they were told, go kick rocks. So
yeah, that's the thing. It really doesn't fucking matter because like the Commanders were not trading down from number 2. Like I think people, I don't know how many times this has to be said for people to just like accept it, but the trade was never going to happen because the Commanders didn't want to do it. They didn't. It doesn't matter. Like Jaden Daniels was never going to be a Raider. Like I'm sorry, guys. It's like let it go, man. It's tough, but he's a Washington Commander.
I mean, the Raiders definitely did their they went through the steps. They made the calls, and I think they were, Bears were not trading, Commanders were not trading. The Patriots, I think, were probably the ones who were like, you know what, we don't really want to trade, but if you blow our house down, maybe we might think about it. But today, want a definite no as far as don't call me again. But the first two definitely were taking Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, so that wasn't really an option. The Raiders, their option would have been they could have traded up and get one of the next 3 guys, and that one didn't happen. That was really their only play as far as getting a quarterback in the top, half of last year's first round.
Yeah, and then it's just funny. There's all sorts of rumors flying around, and a lot of it is because of these aggregate accounts that they even take like things people joke about on the radio and say it's an ESPN report or whatever it is. So be careful what you listen to out there. Not everything is true. But yeah, I guess it's that time where everybody's just leeching on to the latest rumors. But yeah, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully next time we talk to you guys, we will have some more, or the Raiders will have some more news to give out, and maybe they'll have somebody hired. All right, we will talk to you guys probably next week.
All right, Joe. Get that new intro, man. I gotta figure that.
Yeah, oh, yeah. We'll get a new intro. We'll get a new intro.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Hasta la vista.
Later.
All right, Joe.